Welcome back to the Notebook Check Tech Review channel, where we've got the ASUS UX510 here. It is the latest version, 2016 version of this, basically a pretty large and high-end ultrabook. That means it's a dual-core processor inside, U-series, a Skylake in this case, Core i7 with 8 gigs of RAM and an SSD, and it looks nice. It looks thin, and it weighs only 2 kilograms, which for a 15-inch device with a GeForce GTX960M inside isn't a bad weight. It actually feels good, it looks good all round, and there's some really nice finishing to the device. As you'd expect with the ASUS Zenbook, that range has always had these concentric circles, as ASUS has always called it, around the device. What I'm going to do in this video is give you some idea of how we scored it in our test results. The overall score was 84%, but I'll break that down and give you some scores about things like battery life, important, processor performance, graphics performance. I'll give you some idea of how the gaming went on this, and we'll look at some things like the screen as well. And that's, in fact, where we'll start, because this is an IPS non-glossy full HD screen. It's actually a pretty nice screen. It's non-touch. And what I want to do is give you some of the specs. So look up there right now, and there are the specs, or sorry, the test results that we got from our Notebook Check tests. It's not a groundbreaking screen. Let me run through some of those figures for you. Contrast is acceptable at nearly 1,000 to 1 there. We've got deltas on the colors. That's the variation between the color you see and the real color in the real world, of around 5 for color and around 4.5 for black and white. That's not too bad. That's acceptable in this range of device. Something closer to 2 or below would be something where you couldn't really determine the difference between the colors on the screen and the color in the real world. The Srgb coverage isn't that great there, but overall it's not a bad screen. The brightness, 360 nits in the middle, means you might actually get some work done outside, or at least next to a very bright window with this. We couldn't determine any pulse width modulation flickering on this, and if you want to look at some of the response times, so those of you that are interested in gaming, take a look at the full review where we've got the response times from black to white and from grey to black and grey to white on the full review. Check that out there. Let's take a quick look around the device then. Port selection on this isn't fantastic, so we're going to take it from this side. On this side we've got 2 USBs, so 1, 2 there. We've got an HDMI port, and this is a USB-C. That USB-C is a USB 3.1 Gen 1 port, so it's not Gen 2, and it doesn't support Thunderbolt. On the other side then, you'll see the Kensington lock, the SD card reader, which wasn't too fast in our tests. It could have been a lot faster actually. And there's 2 USB 2.0 ports as well, so they're not 3.0 ports there. You've also got the Intel wireless AC7265 card inside that goes up to AC standards, and of course Bluetooth 4. I want to mention the battery inside. This is a 48 watt-hour battery. Now, in terms of battery sizes for devices of this weight and size, that's not that great. There are devices that have 60, 70, 80 and even 90 watt hours for this weight. So this is not going to be a battery life killer, but I'll give you the full battery life test results later on in this video. ASUS ships a mouse with this, which gives you a little bit of an idea that it might be oriented towards gaming. So what I'll do now is give you some of the gaming test results. As you can see, it's not barrier-free gaming. And as we look at the table there for the game results, you see a lot of green, so a lot of encouraging gaming scores there. A few reds there. When you get up to full HD and higher settings on the latest games, you're going to be stuck. On the CPU single-core score results, it's not keeping up with some of the quad-core devices, but in terms of the dual-core devices, so take, for example, that XPS 15 there from 2016, it is 10% faster than that on the single-core speed. I'll mention turbo and heat in a minute. PC Mark 8 score was 4,341, which comes in at sort of the high end of these dual-core U-series CPUs. There's a good strong SSD inside. There are the scores there. So that really adds to the value, certainly in terms of starting up and mixing up work applications and switching between work applications. That's really going to help. 8 gigs of RAM, obviously much better than the 4 gigs of RAM. 8 gigs is really now entry level in 2016, moving to 2017. So think about that when you're looking at some of the last year's ultrabook style devices, which really only came with 4 gigabytes of RAM. Onto the temperature and throttle test. So under our full stress test, which is a pretty heavy test and not something you'll really get in the real world, this did pretty well. Not too much throttling under battery power or under mains power, and that applies to both the CPU and the GPU. So pretty nice, and in fact it wasn't getting warm either. So overall pretty well designed in terms of thermals and throttling. I mentioned the 48 watt-hour battery and said that it wasn't really the biggest capacity we've seen in this sort of size device and this weight of device, but the battery lives are good. In our test, over 10 hours for the idle and well over 7 hours for your web browsing and video playback performance. So that's a really good score considering the medium-sized battery inside this. So good points to ASUS on that. So just to summarize for you then very quickly, 83%, I mentioned 84% at the top of the review, sorry, it's 83%, 1% less than I mentioned. Not a bad score, and there's really only 3 things you need to worry about. Number 1, the SD card reader is a little bit slow. Number 2, there's no Ethernet port on this. So if you're looking for an Ethernet port, you're going to have to look at a USB 2 adapter. USB 2 will be fine for gigabit Ethernet. And the keyboard, it's got a backlight, but it could be a little bit crisper. That's one criticism from our reviewer there. Overall, though, a pretty good package. $1,299 for this Core i7 with the SSD and the 1 terabyte spinning hard drive in as well. So actually a pretty good rounded package if you're looking for a good solid 15-inch all-rounder with some gaming capabilities and probably a good full HD capability in terms of video editing and a little bit of 4K as well. That was the ASUS Zenbook UX510 2016 version. My name's Chippy. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I've got 2 more devices sitting down there that are going to be reviewed over the next 24 hours. If you subscribe, you get notifications when I put those up in the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next Notebook Check video review.